Hey, my name is Cora Lemonnier, and I will be talking to you about climate change and how it affects the world economy. In the last 2 decades, we have seen an escalation of weather patterns that have destroyed cities, destroying homes, infrastructure, and our environment. These changes in rising weather patterns, like the flood of Hurricane Katrina in 2005 that killed 1,800 people, to now just recent natural disasters that span throughout the Caribbean, hitting Puerto Rico the hardest. Hurricane Maria killed about 4,600 people, and as grim as that may sound, these shifts in climate change is very costly. The United States spent up to 45 to 95 billion dollars in relief just for Puerto Rico alone. These high costs to help disaster-ridden cities have severe consequences for the global economy. Damages to people's property and infrastructure leave people homeless and in search of where they might live next. The rebuilding of these costly infrastructures and preventive measures to combat these shifts in climate change will continue to be incredibly expensive. Another concern is that loss of productivity will significantly rise, which will cause a decline in trade and commerce, especially in those hard hit areas, but it will also have a ripple effect on the world economy. This is some of the cost of disasters in the United States. So, Hurricane Harvey and Irma racked up $200 billion. Hurricane Maria have devastated Puerto Rico and accounted for almost 85 billion in insured damages. The California wildfire saw damages resulting in $13 billion and 43 people dying. The tornadoes in the Midwest has caused $3.9 billion in damages, and severe drought and storms in the upper Midwest have occurred $5 billion in damages. From 2000 to 2018, the death toll in the United States reached up to 100,000 people due to natural disasters. With rising temperatures that have doubled from decades before 1970, rising 0.07 Celsius yearly to now 0.17 Celsius, we can see some grim predictions on how it will affect the global economy. The rising temperature will make natural disasters like hurricane floods and etc. more powerful and will force people whose homes were destroyed to be displaced and find new places to live. Just this year alone in the United States has spent roughly over $300 billion on natural disaster relief alone, making it one of the most costliest years in American history. The destruction of these heightened natural disasters due to climate change have even a more significant effect on poor, undeveloped nations where they do not have the funds to help with necessary crisis relief. This leads to mass migration to more developed countries as these people seek refuge. When an entire region gets decimated to natural disaster, it too also has a ripple effect on the larger global economy. So natural disasters has cost up to $2.1 trillion in damages and infrastructures and other related costs. So this picture was taken last year at the California fire in Santa Rosa. So yeah. From 2000 to 2017, the death toll globally was little less than 1.3 million people, and affecting less than 3 billion people. With the intensity of natural disasters escalating, you will see mass migration. 2018-2014, a record of little over 180 people worldwide were forced to relocate due to floods, tropical storms, and other natural disasters. This leads to my next point, the loss of productivity among people that are in hard hit areas due to natural disasters will leave them more global economic uncertainty. The destruction of roads, bridges, and buildings where people work can halt the local economy entirely. Indonesia real gross domestic product GDP is projected to decrease by 2030 because of the effects of climate change on the agriculture market. Because of this consequences rises the consumer price index CPI on products like soybeans and rice, which cause more uncertainty in the food security. Natural disasters can change the global economy by shifting supply and demand. For example, with Indonesia agriculture supply diminishing due to natural disaster, the demand for the scarce produce will only spike costs. This is with one this is with one product in one state. So if this same logic is applied more broadly to different products, we can see an adverse effect on the global economy. Countries like Indonesia and other countries that are prone to more natural disasters should be concerning to more well-developed nations because these bigger countries look to undeveloped countries for resources like product, service, and cheap labor. If these more developed countries like the US and the European Union and China want to keep their prices down for their citizens, they must do their part in funding more research and more preventative actions to combat the rising climate. With the destruction of resources and infrastructure, it will be harder for companies to stay competitive around the world and will have to make drastic decisions on how many people to employ and the price of their product, which shifts the supply and demand on their product, and that will have a ripple effect on the global economy. Countries like the US, EU, and China use developing countries for their cheap labor and resources so they can sell to their consumers for a relatively lower price. In contrast, if they were to produce in their own country, where people's salaries are more than the developing countries. So on a grander scale, if there a depletion of resources around the world, we will see prices going up and companies laying off large amount of people so that it will not affect their revenue. People with no source of income will have to seek other places for work. Also, the effect of natural disaster affect food security, which 815 million people already are facing starvation or undernourishment. And that number will only increase with resources like produce and livestock being destroyed by natural disaster by increasing the change in climate. Death tolls around the world in 2017 was over 9,000 people. In conclusion, with climate rising every year, it hurts the global market with people losing their homes, displacing local labor, and disrupting the broader global economy. People are missing their source of income because either they cannot go to work because of the poor infrastructure or their work site was destroyed due to the increase of natural disaster caused by rising temperatures of the climate. These changes in climate ultimately affect how we trade with other countries and how each country's GDP will be profoundly impacted. This is why former President Barack Obama made it a priority to set carbon emission limits for the United States because he knew that the rising temperatures are also a trade issue. Things might not seem so optimistic with this new administration under President Donald Trump. Trump has made it a priority to one of his campaign promise to quote unquote bring coal back and get out the quote unquote costly Paris Climate Agreement. This negative outlook does not help relieve the worries on how the global economy will be affected because of the rising temperature in the climate. So people around the world must do their part to combat this problem if we're going to have an economically stable future for ourselves and our future generations. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much. My